Section 41 of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Fetterman. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe, Dasent. Section 41. The Lad Who Went to the North Wind. Once upon a time, there was an old widow who had one son, and as she was poorly and weak, her son had to go up into the safe to fetch meal for cooking. But when he got outside the safe and was just going down the steps, there came the north wind, puffing and blowing, caught up the meal and so away with it through the air. Then the lad went back into the safe for more, but when he came out again on the steps, if the north wind didn't come again and carry off the meal with a puff, and more than that, he did so the third time. At this the lad got very angry, and as he thought it hard that the north wind should behave so, he thought he'd just look him up and ask him to give up his meal. So off he went, but the way was long, and he walked and walked, but at last he came to the north wind's house. "Good day," said the lad, "and thank you for coming to see us yesterday." "Good day," answered the north wind, for his voice was loud and gruff. "And thanks for coming to see me. What do you want?" "Oh," answered the lad, "I only wish to ask you to be so good as to let me have back that meal you took from me on the safe steps, for we haven't much to live on, and if you're going to go on snapping up the morsel we have, there'll be nothing for it but to starve." "I haven't got your meal," said the north wind, "but if you are in such need, I'll give you a cloth which will get you everything you want, if you only say, 'Cloth, spread yourself, and serve up all kind of good dishes.'" With this the lad was well content, but as the way was so long he couldn't get home in one day, so he turned into an inn on the way, and when they were going to sit down to supper he laid the cloth on the table which stood in the corner and said, "Cloth, spread yourself, and serve up all kinds of good dishes." He had scarce said so before the cloth did as it was bid, and all who stood by it thought it a fine thing, but most of all the landlady. So when all were fast asleep at dead of night, she took the lad's cloth and put another in its stead, just like the one he had got from the north wind, but which couldn't so much as serve up a bit of dry bread. So, when the lad woke, he took his cloth and went off with it, and that day he got home to his mother. "Now," said he, "I've been to the north wind's house, and a good fellow he is, for he gave me this cloth, and when I only say to it, 'Cloth, spread yourself, and serve up all kind of good dishes,' I get any sort of food I please." "All very true, I dare say," said his mother, "but seeing is believing, and I shan't believe it till I see it." So the lad made haste, drew out a table, laid the cloth on it, and said, "Cloth, spread yourself, and serve up all kind of good dishes." But never a bit of dry bread did the cloth serve up. "Well," said the lad, "there's no help for it but to go to the north wind again." And away he went. So he came to where the north wind lived late in the afternoon. "Good evening," said the lad. "Good evening," said the north wind. "I want my rights for that meal of ours which you took," said the lad, "for as for that cloth I got, it isn't worth a penny." "I've got no meal," said the north wind, "but yonder you have a ram which coins nothing but golden ducats as soon as you say to it, 'Rain, ram, make money.'" So the lad thought this a fine thing, but as it was too far to get home that day, he turned in for the night to the same inn where he had slept before. Before he called for anything, he tried the truth of what the north wind had said of the ram, and found it all right, but when the landlord saw that, he thought it was a famous ram, and when the lad had fallen asleep, he took another which couldn't coin gold ducats, and changed the two. Next morning off went the lad, and when he got home to his mother, he said, "After all, the north wind is a jolly fellow, for now he has given me a ram which can coin golden ducats, if I only say, 'Ram, ram, make money.'" "All very true, I dare say," said his mother, "but I shan't believe any such stuff until I see the ducats made." "Ram, ram, make money," said the lad, but if the ram made anything, it wasn't money. So the lad went back again to the north wind and blew him up, and said the ram was worth nothing, and he must have his rights for the meal. "Well," said the North Wind. "I've got nothing else to give you but that old stick in the corner yonder. But it's a stick of that kind, that if you say, 'Stick, stick, lay on,' it lays on till you say, 'Stick, stick, now stop.'" So as the way was long, the lad turned in this night, too, to the landlord. But as he could pretty well guess how things stood as the cloth and the ram, he lay down at once on the bench and began to snore as if he were asleep. Now the landlord, who easily saw that the stick must be worth something, hunted up one which was like it, and when he heard the lad snore, was going to change the two. But just as the landlord was about to take it, the lad bawled out, "Stick, stick, lay on." So the stick began to beat the landlord, till he jumped over chairs and tables and benches, and yelled and roared, oh my, bid the stick be still, else it will beat me to death, and you shall have back both your cloth and your ram." When the lad thought the landlord had got enough, he said, "Stick, stick, now stop." Then he took the cloth and put it into his pocket, and went home with his stick in his hand, leading the ram by a cord round its horns, and so he got his rights for the meal he had lost. End of section 41. Recording by David Fetterman.
Section 42 of Popular Tales from the Norse.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Morgan Saletta. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent. Section 42. The Master Thief. Once upon a time, there was a poor cottager who had 3 sons. He had nothing to leave them when he died, and no money with which to put them to any trade, so that he did not know what to make of them. At last he said he would give them leave to take to anything each liked best, and to go whithersoever they pleased, and he would go with them a bit of the way, and so he did. He went with them till they came to a place where 3 roads met, and there each of them chose a road, and their father bade them good-bye, and went home. I have never heard tell what became of the 2 elder, but as far as the youngest, he went both far and long, as you shall hear. So it fell out one night, as he was going through a great wood, that such bad weather overtook him. It blew, and sleeted, and drove so that he could scarce keep his eyes open, and in a trice, before he knew how it was, he got bewildered, and could not find either road or path. But as he went on and on, at last he saw a glimmering of light, far, far off in the wood. So he thought he would try and get to the light, and after a time he did reach it. There it was in a large house, and the fire was blazing so brightly inside that he could tell the folk had not yet gone to bed. So he went in, and saw an old dame bustling about and minding the house. "Good evening," said the youth.
"Good evening,"
said the old dame. "Hutetu, it's such foul weather out of doors tonight," said he.
"So it is,"
said she. "Can I get leave to have a bed and shelter here tonight?" asked the youth.
"You'll get no good by sleeping here,"
said the old dame.
"for if the folk come home and find you here, they'll kill both me and you."
"What sort of folk, then, are they that live here?" asked the youth.
"Oh, robbers, and a bad lot of them, too,"
said the old dame.
"They stole me away when I was little, and have kept me as their housekeeper ever since."
"Well, for all that, I think I'll just go to bed," said the youth. "Come what may, I'll not stir out at night in such weather."
"Well, well,"
said the old dame,
"but if you stay, it will be the worse for you."
With that the youth got into a bed which stood there, but he dared not go to sleep, and very soon after in came the robbers. So the old dame told them how a stranger fellow had come in whom she had not been able to get out of the house again. "Did you see if he had any money?" said the robbers.
"Such a one as he, money," said
the old dame.
"The tramper. Why, if he had clothes to his back, it was as much as he had."
Then the robbers began to talk among themselves what they should do with him, if they should kill him outright, or what else they should do. Meantime the youth got up and began to talk to them, and to ask if they didn't want a servant, for it might be that he would be glad to enter their service. "Oh," they said, "if you have a mind to follow the trade that we follow, you can very well get a place here." "It's all one to me what trade I follow," said the youth, "for when I left home, father gave me leave to take to any trade I chose." "Well, have you a mind to steal?" asked the robbers. "I don't care," said the youth, for he thought it would not take long to learn that trade. Now there lived a man a little way off who had 3 oxen. One of these he was going to take to the town to sell, and the robbers had heard what he was going to do. So they said to the youth, if he were good to steal the ox from the man by the way without his knowing it, and without doing him any harm, they would give him leave to be their serving man. Well, the youth set off, and took with him a pretty shoe, with a silver buckle on it, which lay about the house, and he put the shoe in the road along which the man was going with his ox, and when he had done that, he went in the wood, and hid himself under a bush. So when the man came by, he saw the shoe at once. "That's a nice shoe," said he. "If only I had the fellow to it, I'd take it home with me, and perhaps I'd put my old dame in a good humor for once." For you must know he had an old wife, so cross and snappish, it was not long between each time that she boxed his ears. But then he bethought him that he could do nothing with the odd shoe unless he had the fellow to it. So he went on his way, and let the shoe lie in the road. Then the youth took up the shoe, and made all the haste he could to get before the man by a short cut through the wood, and laid it down before him in the road again. When the man came along with his ox, he got quite angry with himself for being so dull as to leave the fellow to the shoe lying in the road instead of taking it with him. So he tied the ox to the fence, and said to himself, "I may just as well run back and pick up the other, and then I'll have a pair of good shoes for my old dame, and so, perhaps, I'll get a kind word from her for once." So he set off, and hunted up and down for the shoe, but no shoe did he find, and at length he had to go back with the one he had. But, meanwhile, the youth had taken the ox and gone off with it, and when the man came and saw his ox gone, he began to cry and bewail, for he was afraid his old dame would kill him outright when she came to know that the ox was lost. But just then it came across his mind that he would go home and take the second ox, and drive it to the town, and not let his old dame know anything about the matter. So he did this, and went home and took the ox without his dame's knowing it, and set off with it to the town. But the robbers knew all about it, and they said to the youth, if he could get this ox too, without the man's knowing it, and without his doing him any harm, he should be as good as any one of them. If that were all, the youth said, he did not think it a very hard thing. This time he took with him a rope, and hung himself up under the armpits to a tree right in the man's way. So the man came along with his ox, and when he saw such a sight hanging there, he began to feel a little queer. "Well," said he, "whatever heavy thoughts you had who have hanged yourself up there, it can't be helped. You may hang for what I care. I can't breathe life into you again." And with that he went on his way with his ox. Down slipped the youth from the tree, and ran by a footpath, and got before the man, and hung himself up right in his way again. "Bless me," said the man, "were you really so heavy at heart that you hanged yourself up there, or is it only a piece of witchcraft that I see before me? Aye, you may hang for all I care, whether you are a ghost or whatever you are." So he passed on with his ox. Now the youth did just as he had done twice before. He jumped down from the tree, ran through the wood by a footpath, and hung himself up right in the man's way again. But when the man saw this sight for the third time, he said to himself, "Well, this is an ugly business. Is it likely now that they should have been so heavy at heart as to hang themselves, all these three? No, I cannot think it is anything else than a piece of witchcraft that I see. But now I'll soon know for certain. If the other two are still hanging there, it must be really so. But if they are not, then it can be nothing but witchcraft that I see." So he tied up his ox, and ran back to see if the others were still really hanging there. But while he went and peered up into all the trees, the youth jumped down, and took his ox, and ran off with it. When the man came back and found his ox gone, he was in a sad plight, and, as anyone might know without being told, he began to cry and bemoan. But at last he came to take it easier, and so he thought, "There's no other help for it than to go home and take the third ox without my dame's knowing it, and to try and drive a good bargain with it, so that I may get a good sum of money for it." So he went home and set off with the ox, and his old dame knew never a word about the matter. But the robbers, they knew all about it, and they said to the youth, that if he could steal this ox, as he had stolen the other two, then he should be master over the whole band. Well, the youth set off, and ran into the wood, and as the man came by with his ox, he set up a dreadful bellowing, just like a great ox in the wood. When the man heard that, you can't think how glad he was, for it seemed to him that he knew the voice of his big bullock, and he thought that now he should find both of them again. So he tied up the third ox, and ran off from the road to look for them in the wood. But meantime the youth went off with the third ox. Now, when the man came back and found he had lost this ox too, he was so wild that there was no end to his grief. He cried and roared and beat his breast, and, to tell the truth, it was many days before he dared go home, for he was afraid lest his old dame should kill him outright on the spot. As for the robbers, they were not very well pleased either, when they had to own that the youth was master over the whole band. So one day they thought they should try their hands at something which he was not man enough to do, and they set off all together, every man jack of them, and left him alone at home. Now, the first thing that he did when they were all well clear of the house was to drive the oxen out to the road, so that they might run back to the man from whom he had stolen them, and right glad he was to see them, as you may fancy. Next he took all the horses which the robbers had, and loaded them with the best things he could lay his hands on, gold and silver, and clothes and other fine things, and then he bade the old dame to greet the robbers when they came back, and to thank them for him, and to say that now he was setting off on his travels, and they would have hard work to find him again, and with that off he started. After a good bit he came to the road along which he was going when he fell among the robbers, and when he got near home, and could see his father's cottage, he put on a uniform which he had found among the clothes he had taken from the robbers, and which was made just like a general's. So he drove up to the door as if he were any other great man. After that he went in and asked if he could have a lodging. No, that he couldn't at any price. "However should I be able," said the man, "to make room in my house for such a fine gentleman, I who scarce have a rag to lie upon, and miserable rags too?" "You always were a stingy old hunk," said the youth, "and so you are still, when you won't take your own son in." "What? You, my son?" said the man. "Don't you know me again?" said the youth. Well, after a little while he did know him again. "But what have you been turning your hand to, that you have made yourself so great a man in such haste?" asked the man. "Oh, I'll soon tell you," said the youth. "You said I might take to any trade I chose, and so I bound myself apprentice to a pack of thieves and robbers, and now I've served my time out, and am become a master thief." Now there lived a squire close by to his father's cottage, and he had such a great house and such heaps of money, he could not tell how much he had. He had a daughter too, and a smart and pretty girl she was. So the master thief set his heart about having her to wife, and he told his father to go to the squire and ask for his daughter for him. "If he asks by what trade I get my living, you can say I'm a master thief." "I think you have lost your wits," said the man, "for you can't be in your right mind when you think of such stuff." No, he had not lost his wits. His father must and should go to the squire and ask for his daughter. "Nay, but I tell you, I daren't go to the squire and be your spokesman, he who is so rich and has so much money," said the man. Yes, there was no help for it, said the master thief. He should go, whether he would or no, and if he did not go by fair means, he would soon make him go by foul. But the man was still loath to go, so he stepped after him, and rubbed him down with a good birch cudgel, and kept on till the man came crying and sobbing inside the squire's door. "How now, my man, what ails you?" said the squire. So he told him the whole story, how he had 3 sons who set off one day, and how he had given them leave to go whithersoever they would, and to follow whatever calling they chose. And here now is the youngest come home, and has thrashed me till he has made me come to you and ask for your daughter for him to wife, and he bids me say, besides, that he's a master thief. And so he fell to crying and sobbing again. "Never mind, my man," said the squire, laughing. "Just go back and tell him from me he must prove his skill first. If he can steal the roast from the spit in the kitchen on Sunday, while all the household are looking after it, he shall have my daughter. Just go and tell him that." So he went back and told the youth, who thought it would be an easy job. So he set about and caught 3 hares alive, and put them into a bag, and dressed himself in some old rags, until he looked so poor and filthy that it made one's heart bleed to see. And then he stole into the passage at the back door of the squire's house on the Sunday forenoon, with his bag, just like any other beggar boy. But the squire himself and all his household were in the kitchen watching the roast. Just as they were doing this, the youth let 1 hare go, and it set off and ran round and round the yard in front of the house. "Oh, just look at that hare," said the folk in the kitchen, and were all for running out to catch it. Yes, the squire saw it running too. "Oh, let it run," said he. "There's no use in thinking to catch a hare on the spring." A little while after, the youth let the 2nd hare go, and they saw it in the kitchen, and thought it was the same they had seen before, and still wanted to run out and catch it. But the squire said again it was no use. It was not long before the youth let the 3rd hare go, and it set off and ran round and round the yard as the others before it. Now they saw it from the kitchen, and still thought it was the same hare that kept on running about, and were all eager to be out after it. "Well, it is a fine hare," said the squire. "Come, let's see if we can't lay our hands on it." So out he ran, and the rest with him. Away they all went, the hare before, and they after, so that it was rare fun to see. But meantime the youth took the roast and ran off with it, and where the squire got a roast for his dinner that day, I don't know. But one thing I know, and that is, that he had no roast hare, though he ran after it till he was both warm and weary. Now it chanced that the priest came to dinner that day, and when the squire told him what a trick the master thief had played him, he made such game of him that there was no end of it.
"For my part," said the priest, "I can't think how it would ever happen to me to be made such a fool of by a fellow like that."
"Very well, only keep a sharp lookout," said the squire. "Maybe he'll come to see you before you know a word of it." But the priest stuck to his text. That he did, and made game of the squire because he had been so taken in. Later in the afternoon came the master thief, and wanted to have the squire's daughter, as he had given his word. But the squire began to talk him over, and said, "Oh, you must first prove your skill a little more, for what you did today was no great thing after all. Couldn't you now play off a good trick on the priest, who is sitting in there and making game of me for letting such a fellow as you twist me round his thumb?" "Well, as for that, it wouldn't be hard," said the master thief. So he dressed himself up like a bird, and threw a great white sheet over his body, and took the wings of a goose and tied them to his back, and so climbed up into a great maple which stood in the priest's garden. And when the priest came home in the evening, the youth began to bawl out, "Father Lawrence! Father Lawrence!" for that was the priest's name.
"Who is that calling me?"
said the priest. "I'm an angel," said the master thief, "sent from God to let you know that you shall be taken up alive into heaven for your piety's sake. Next Monday night you must hold yourself ready for the journey, for I shall come then to fetch you in a sack, and all your gold and your silver, and all that you have of this world's goods, you must lay together in a heap in your dining room." Well, Father Lawrence fell on his knees before the angel, and thanked him, and the very next day he preached a farewell sermon, and gave it out that there had come down an angel unto the big maple in his garden, who told him that he was to be taken up alive into heaven for his piety's sake, and he preached and made such a touching discourse that all who were at church wept, both young and old. So the next Monday night came the master thief, like an angel again, and the priest fell on his knees and thanked him before he was put into the sack. But when he had got him in well, the master thief drew and dragged him over stocks and stones.
"Ow, ow!" groaned the priest inside the sack. "Wherever are you going?"
"This is the narrow way which leadeth unto the kingdom of heaven," said the master thief, who went on dragging him along till he had nearly broken every bone in his body. At last he tumbled him into a goose house that belonged to the squire, and the geese began pecking and pinching him with their bills, so that he was more dead than alive. "Now you are in the flames of purgatory, to be cleansed and purified for life everlasting," said the master thief, and with that he went his way, and took all the gold which the priest had laid together in his dining room. The next morning, when the goose girl came to let the geese out, she heard how the priest lay in the sack, and bemoaned himself in the goose house. "In heaven's name, who's there, and what ails you?" she cried.
"Oh," said the priest, "if you are an angel from heaven, do let me out, and let me return again to earth, for it is worse here than in hell. The little fiends keep on pinching me with tongs."
"Heaven help us, I am no angel at all," said the girl, as she helped the priest out of the sack. "I only look after the squire's geese, and like enough they are the little friends which have pinched your reverence."
"Oh," groaned the priest, "this is all that master thief's doing. Ah, my gold and my silver, and my fine clothes!"
And he beat his breast, and hobbled home at such a rate that the girl thought he had lost his wits all at once. Now when the squire came to hear how it had gone with the priest, and how he had been along the narrow way and into purgatory, he laughed till he well nigh split his sides. And when the master thief came and asked for his daughter, as he had promised, the squire put him off again, and said, "You must do one masterpiece better still, that I may see plainly what you are fit for. Now, I have 12 horses in my stable, and on them I will put 12 grooms, one on each. If you are so good a thief as to steal the horses from under them, I'll see what I can do for you." "Very well, I dare say I can do it," said the master thief. "But shall I really have your daughter if I can?"
"Yes, if you can, I'll do my best for you,"
said the squire. So the master thief set off to a shop, and bought brandy enough to fill 2 pocket flasks, and into one of them he put a sleepy drink, but into the other only brandy. After that he hired 11 men to lie in wait at night, behind the squire's stable yard, and last of all, for fair woods and a good bit of money, he borrowed a ragged gown and cloak from an old woman, and so, with a staff in his hand, and a bundle at his back, he limped off, as evening drew on, towards the squire's stable. Just as he got there, they were watering the horses for the night, and had their hands full of work. "What the devil do you want?" said one of the grooms to the old woman.
Oh, hoo-too, it is so bitter cold,"
said she, and shivered and shook, and made wry faces.
"Hoo-too, it is so cold, a poor wretch may easily freeze to death."
And with that she fell to shivering and shaking again.
"Oh, for the love of heaven, can I get leave to stay here for a while and sit inside the stable door?"
"To the devil with your leave," said one. "Pack yourself off this minute, for if the squire sets his eye on you, he'll lead us a pretty dance." "Oh, the poor old bag of bones," said another, whose heart took pity on her. "The old hag may sit inside and welcome. Such a one as she can do no harm." And the rest said, some she should stay, and some she shouldn't. But while they were quarreling and minding the horses, she crept further and further into the stable, till at last she sat herself down behind the door, and when she had got so far, no one gave any more heed to her. As the night wore on, the men found it rather cold work to sit so still and quiet on horseback. "Hoo-too, it is so devilish cold," said one, and beat his arms crosswise. "That it is," said another. "I freeze so that my teeth chatter." "If only one had a quid to chew," said a third. Well, there was one who had an ounce or two, so they shared it between them, though it wasn't much, after all, that each got, and so they chewed and spat and chewed. This helped them somewhat, but in a little while they were just as bad as ever. "Hoo-too," said one, and shivered and shook.
"Hoo-too,"
said the old woman, and shivered so that every tooth in her head chattered. Then she pulled out the flask with brandy in it, and her hand shook so that the spirit splashed about in the flask, and then she took such a gulp that it went bop in her throat. "What's that you've got in your flask, old girl?" said one of the grooms.
"Oh, it is only a drop of brandy, old man,"
said she. "Brandy? Well, I never! Do let me have a drop!" screamed the whole 12, one after another.
"Oh, but it is such a little drop,"
mumbled the old woman.
"It will not even wet your mouths round."
But they must and would have it. There was no help for it, and so she pulled out the flask with the sleepy drink in it, and put it to the first man's lips. Then she shook no more, but guided the flask so that each of them got what he wanted, and the 12th had not done drinking before the first sat and snored. Then the master thief threw off his beggar's rags, and took one groom after the other so softly off their horses, and set them astride on the beams between the stalls, and so he called his 11 men, and rode off with the squire's 12 horses. But when the squire got up in the morning, and went to look after his grooms, they had just begun to come to, and some of them fell to spurring the beams with their spurs, till the splinters flew again, and some fell off, and some still hung on and sat there looking like fools. "Ho, ho!" said the squire. "I see very well who has been here. But as for you, a pretty set of blockheads you must be to sit here and let the master thief steal the horses from between your legs." So they all got a good leathering, because they had not kept a sharper lookout. Further on in the day came the master thief again, and told how he had managed the matter, and asked for the squire's daughter, as he had promised. But the squire gave him $100 down, and said he must do something better still. "Do you think now," said he, "you can steal the horse from under me while I am riding on his back?" "Oh, sure, I dare say I could," said the master thief, "if I were really sure of getting your daughter." Well, well, the squire would see what he could do, and he told the master thief a day when he would be taking a ride on a great common where they drilled the troops. So the master thief soon got hold of an old worn-out jade of a mare, and set to work, and made traces and collar of withies and broom twigs, and bought an old beggarly cart and a great cask. After that, he told an old beggar woman he would give her $10 if she would get inside the cask, and keep her mouth agape over the taphole, into which he was going to stick his finger. No harm should happen to her, she should only be driven about a little, and if he took his finger out more than once, she was to have $10 more. Then he threw a few rags and tatters over himself, and stuffed himself out, and put on a wig and a great beard of goat's hair, so that no one could know him again, and set off for the common, where the squire had already been riding about a good bit. When he came to the place, he went along so softly and slowly that he scarce made an inch of way. "Gee up, gee up!" And so he went on a little, then he stood stock still, and so on a little again, and altogether the pace was so poor, it never once came into the squire's head that this could be the master thief. At last the squire rode right up to him, and asked if he had seen anyone lurking about in the woods thereabouts.
"No,"
said the man,
I haven't seen a soul." "Harkye now," said the squire, "if you have a mind to ride into the wood and hunt about and see if you can fall upon anyone lurking about there, you shall have the loan of my horse, and a shilling into the bargain, to drink my health for your pains."
"I don't see how I can go," said the man, "for I have been going to a wedding with this cask of mead which I have been to town to fetch, and here the tap has fallen out by the way, and so I must go along, holding my finger in the tap hole."
"Ride off," said the squire. "I'll look after your horse and cask." Well, on these terms the man was willing to go, but he begged the squire to be quick in putting his finger into the tap hole when he took his own out, and to mind and keep it there till he came back. At last the squire grew weary of standing there with his finger in the tap hole, so he took it out.
"Now I shall have $10 more,"
screamed the old woman inside the cask, and then the squire saw at once how the land lay, and took himself off home, but he had not gone far before they met him with a fresh horse, for the master thief had already been to his house, and told them to send one. The day after, he came to the squire, and would have his daughter, as he had given his word. But the squire put him off again with fine words, and gave him $200, and said he must do one more masterpiece. If he could do that, he should have her. Well, the master thief thought he could do it, if he only knew what it was to be.
"Do you think now," said the squire, "you can steal the sheet off our bed and the shift off my wife's back? Do you think you could do that?"
"It shall be done," said the master thief. "I only wish I was as sure of getting your daughter." So, when night began to fall, the master thief went out and cut down a thief who hung on the gallows, and threw him across his shoulders and carried him off. Then he got a long ladder and set it up against the squire's bedroom window, and so climbed up, and kept bobbing the dead man up and down, just for all the world like one that was peeping in at the window.
"That's the master thief, old lass,"
said the squire, and gave his wife a nudge on the side.
"Now see if I don't shoot him, that's all."
So saying, he took up a rifle which he had laid at his bedside. "No, no, pray don't shoot him after telling him he might come and try," said his wife.
"Don't talk to me, for shoot him I will,"
said he, and so he lay there and aimed, but as soon as the head came up before the window, and he saw a little of it, so soon it was down again. At last he thought he had a good aim. Bang went the gun. Down fell the dead body to the ground with a heavy thump, and down went the master thief too, as fast as he could.
"Well," said the squire, "it is quite true that I am the chief magistrate in these parts, but people are fond of talking, and it would be a bore if they came to see this dead man's body. I think the best thing to be done is that I should go down and bury him."
"You must do as you think best, dear," said his wife. So the squire got out of bed and went downstairs, and he had scarce put his foot out of the door before the master thief stole in and went straight upstairs to his wife. "Why, dear, back already?" said she, for she thought it was her husband.
"Oh, yes, I only just put him into a hole and threw a little earth over him. It is enough that he's out of sight, for it is such a bad night out of doors. By and by I'll do it better. But just let me have the sheet to wipe myself with. He was so bloody, and I'll have made myself in such a mess with him."
So he got the sheet. After a while he said,
"Do you know, I'm afraid you must let me have your night shift too, for the sheet won't do by itself. That I can see."
So she gave him the shift also. But just then it came across his mind that he had forgotten to lock the house door, so he must step down and look to that before he came back to bed, and away he went with both shift and sheet. A little while after came the true squire. "Why, what a time you've taken to lock the door, dear," said his wife. "And what have you done with the sheet and shift?"
"What do you say?"
said the squire. "Why, I am asking what you have done with the sheet and shift that you had to wipe off the blood," said she.
"What in the devil's name," said the squire, "has he taken me in this time too?"
Next day came the master thief and asked for the squire's daughter, as he had given his word, and then the squire dared not do anything else than give her to him, and a good lump of money into the bargain, for, to tell the truth, he was afraid lest the master thief should steal the eyes out of his head, and that the people would begin to say spiteful things of him if he broke his word. So the master thief lived well and happily from that time forward. I don't know whether he stole any more, but if he did, I'm quite sure it was only for the sake of a bit of fun. End of chapter 42. Read by Morgan Saletta.
of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Sharon Riskadal. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent. Section 43. The Best Wish. Once upon a time there were 3 brothers. I don't quite know how it happened, but each of them had got the right to wish one thing, whatever he chose. So the 2 elder were not long a-thinking. They wished that every time they put their hands in their pockets they might pull out a piece of money, for, they said, the man who has as much money as he wishes for is always sure to get on in the world. But the youngest wished something better still. He wished that every woman he saw might fall in love with him as soon as she saw him, and you shall soon hear how far better this was than gold and goods. So when they had all wished their wishes, the 2 elder were for setting out to see the world, and Boots, their youngest brother, asked if he mightn't go along with them, but they wouldn't hear of such a thing. Wherever we go, they said, we shall be treated as counts and kings, but you starveling wretch, who haven't a penny, and never will have one, who do you think will care a bit about you? Well, in spite of that, I'd like to go with you, said Boots. Perhaps a dainty bit may fall to my share, too, off the plates of such high and mighty lords. At last, after begging and praying, he got leave to go with them, if he would be their servant, else they wouldn't hear of it. So when they had gone a day or 2, they came to an inn where the 2 who had the money alighted and called for fish and flesh and fowl and brandy and mead and everything that was good. But Boots, poor fellow, had to look after their luggage and all that belonged to the 2 great people. Now as he went to and fro outside, and loitered about in the inn-yard, the innkeeper's wife looked out of the window, and saw the servant of the gentleman upstairs, and all at once she thought she had never set eyes on such a handsome chap. So she stared and stared, and the longer she looked, the handsomer he seemed. "Why, what by the deil's skin and bones is that you are standing there gaping at out of the window?" said her husband. "I think 'twould be better if you just looked how the sucking pig is getting on, instead of hanging out of the window in that way. Don't you know what grand folk we have in the house to-day?" "Oh," said the old dame, "I don't care a farthing about such a pack of rubbish. If they don't like it, they may lump it and be off. But just do come and look at this lad out in the yard. So handsome a fellow I never saw in all my born days. And if you'll do as I wish, we'll ask him to step in and treat him a little, for, poor lad, he seems to have a hard fight of it." "Have you lost the little brains you had, Goody?" said the husband, whose eyes glistened with rage. "Into the kitchen with you, and mind the fire, but don't stand there glowering after strange men." So the wife had nothing left for it but to go into the kitchen and look after the cooking. As for the lad outside, she couldn't get leave to ask him in, or to treat him either. But just as she was about spitting the pig in the kitchen, she made an excuse for running out into the yard, and then and there she gave Boots a pair of scissors, of such a kind that they cut of themselves, out of the air, the loveliest clothes anyone ever saw, silk and satin and all that was fine. "This you shall have, because you are so handsome," said the innkeeper's wife. So when the 2 elder brothers had crammed themselves with roast and boiled, they wished to be off again, and Boots had to stand behind their carriage and be their servant, and so they travelled a good way until they came to another inn. There the 2 brothers again alighted and went indoors, but Boots, who had no money, they wouldn't have inside with them. No, he must wait outside and watch the luggage. "And mind," they said, "if anyone asks you whose servant you are, say we are 2 foreign princes." But the same thing happened now as happened before. While Boots stood hanging about out in the yard, the innkeeper's wife came to the window and saw him, and she too fell in love with him, just like the first innkeeper's wife, and there she stood and stared, for she thought she could never have her fill of looking at him. Then her husband came running through the room with something the two princes had ordered. "Don't stand there like a cow at a barn door, but take this into the kitchen, and look after your fish kettle, goody", said the man. "Don't you see what grand people we have in the house today?" "I don't care a farthing for such a pack of rubbish", said the wife. "If they don't like what they get, they may lump it and eat what they brought with them. But just do come here and see what you shall see. Such a handsome fellow as walks here out in the yard I never saw in all my born days. Shan't we ask him in and treat him a little? He looks as if he needed it, poor chap." And then she went on, "Such a love, such a love." "You never had much wit, and the little you had is clean gone, I can see", said the man, who was much more angry than the first innkeeper, and chased his wife back, neck and crop, into the kitchen. "Into the kitchen with you, and don't stand glowering after lads", he said. So she had to go in and mind her fish kettle, and she dared not treat Boots, for she was afraid of her old man. But as she stood there making up the fire, she made an excuse for running out into the yard, and then and there she gave Boots a tablecloth, which was such that it covered itself with the best dishes you could think of as soon as it was spread out. "This you shall have", she said, "because you are so handsome." So when the two brothers had eaten and drank of all that was in the house, and had paid the bill in hard cash, they set off again, and Boots stood up behind their carriage. But when they had gone so far that they grew hungry again, they turned into a third inn, and called for the best and dearest they could think of. "For", they said, "we are two kings on our travels, and as for our money, it grows like grass." Well, when the innkeeper heard that, there was such a roasting and baking and boiling, why, you might smell the dinner at the next neighbour's house, though it wasn't so very near, and the innkeeper was at his wits' end to find all he wished to put before the two kings. But Boots, he had to stand outside here too, and look after the things in the carriage. So it was the same story over again. The innkeeper's wife came to the window and peeped out, and there she saw the servant standing by the carriage, such a handsome chap she had never set eyes on before, so she looked and looked, and the more she stared the handsomer he seemed to the innkeeper's wife. Then out came the innkeeper scampering through the room, with some dainty which the travelling kings had ordered, and he wasn't very soft-tongued when he saw his old dame standing and glowering out of the window. "Don't you know better than to stand gaping and staring there when we have such great folk in the house?" he said. "Back into the kitchen with you this minute, to your custards." "Well, well", she said, "as for them, I don't care a pin. If they can't wait till the custards are baked, they may go without, that's all. But do, pray, come here, and you'll see such a lovely lad standing out here in the yard. Why, I never saw such a pretty fellow in my life. Shan't we ask him in now and treat him a little, for he looks as if it would do him good. Oh, what a darling, what a darling!" "A wanton gadabout you've been all your days, and so you are still", said her husband, who was in such a rage he scarce knew which leg to stand on. "But if you don't be off to your custards this minute, I'll soon find out how to make you stir your stumps, see if I don't." So the wife had off to her custards as fast as she could, for she knew that her husband would stand no nonsense. But as she stood there over the fire, she stole out into the yard and gave Boots a tap. "If you only turn this tap", she said, "you'll get the finest drink of whatever kind you choose, both mead and wine and brandy, and this you shall have because you are so handsome." So when the two brothers had eaten and drunk all they could, they started from the inn, and Boots stood up behind again as their servant, and thus they drove far and wide, till they came to a king's palace. There the two elder gave themselves out for two emperors' sons, and as they had plenty of money, and were so fine that their clothes shone again ever so far off, they were well treated. They had rooms in the palace, and the king couldn't tell how to make enough of them. But Boots, who went about in the same rags he stood in when he left home, and who never had a penny in his pocket, he was taken up by the king's guard and put across to an island, whither they used to row over all the beggars and rogues that came to the palace. This the king had ordered, because he wouldn't have the mirth at the palace spoilt by those dirty blackguards, and thither too only just as much food as would keep body and soul together was sent over every day. Now Boots' brothers saw very well that the guard was rowing him over to the island, but they were glad to be rid of him, and didn't pay the least heed to him. But when Boots got over there, he just pulled out his scissors and began to snip and cut in the air, so the scissors cut out the finest clothes anyone would wish to see, silk and satin both, and all the beggars on the island were soon dressed far finer than the king and all his guests in the palace. After that Boots pulled out his tablecloth and spread it out, and so they got food too, the poor beggars. Such a feast had never been seen at the king's palace as was served that day at the Beggar's Isle. "Thirsty too, I'll be bound you all are", said Boots, and out with his tap, gave it a turn, and so the beggars got all a drop to drink, and such ale and mead the king himself had never tasted in all his life. So next morning, when those who were to bring the beggars their food on the island came rowing over with the scrapings of the porridge pots and cheese parings, that was what the poor riches had, the beggars wouldn't so much as taste them, and the king's men fell to wondering what it could mean. But they wondered much more when they got a good look at the beggars, for they were so fine the guard thought they must be emperors or popes at least, and that they must have rowed to a wrong island. But when they looked better about them, they saw that they were come to the old place. Then they soon found out it must be he whom they had rowed out the day before who had brought the beggars on the island all this state and bravery. And as soon as they got back to the palace, they were not slow to tell how the man, whom they had rowed over the day before, had dressed out all the beggars so fine and grand that precious things fell from their clothes. And as for the porridge and cheese we took, they wouldn't even taste them, so proud have they got, they said. One of them, too, had smelt out that the lad had a pair of scissors which he cut out the clothes with. When he only snips with those scissors up in the air, he snips and cuts out nothing but silk and satin, said he. So when the princess heard that, she had neither peace nor rest till she saw the lad and his scissors that cut out silk and satin from the air. Such a pair was worth having, she thought, for with its help she would soon get all the finery she wished for. Well, she begged the king so long and hard he was forced to send a messenger for the lad who owned the scissors, and when he came to the palace the princess asked him if it were true that he had such and such a pair of scissors, and if he would sell it to her. Yes, it was all true he had such a pair, said Boots, but sell it he wouldn't, and with that he took the scissors out of his pocket and snipped with them in the air till strips of silk and satin flew all about him. "Nay, you must sell me those scissors", said the princess. "You may ask what you please for them, but have them I must." No, such a scissors he wouldn't sell at any price, for he could never get such a pair again. and while they stood and haggled for the scissors, the Princess had time to look better at Boots, and she too thought with the innkeepers' wives that she had never seen such a handsome fellow before. So she began to bargain for the scissors over again, and begged and prayed Boots to let her have them. He might ask many, many $100 for them, 'twas all the same to her, just so she got them. "No, sell them I won't", said Boots, "but all the same, if I can get leave to sleep one night on the floor of the Princess' bedroom, close by the door, I'll give her the scissors. I'll do her no harm, but if she's afraid, she may have 2 men to watch inside the room." Yes, the Princess was glad enough to give him leave, for she was ready to grant him anything, if she only got the scissors. So Boots lay on the floor inside the Princess' bedroom that night, and 2 men stood watch there too. But the Princess didn't get much rest after all, for when she ought to have been asleep, she must open her eyes to look at Boots, and so it went on the whole night. If she shut her eyes for a minute, she peeped out at him again the next, such a handsome fellow he seemed to her to be. Next morning Boots was rowed over to the Beggar's Isle again, but when they came with the porridge scrapings and cheese parings from the palace, there was no one who would taste them that day either, and so those who brought the food were more astonished than ever. But one of those who brought the food contrived to smell out that the lad who had owned the scissors owned also a tablecloth, which he only needed to spread out, and it was covered with all the good things he could wish for. So when he got back to the palace, he wasn't long before he said, "Such hot joints and such custards I never saw the like of in the king's palace." And when the Princess heard that, she told it to the king, and begged and prayed so long that he was forced to send a messenger out to the island to fetch the lad who owned the tablecloth. And so Boots came back to the palace. The Princess must and would have the cloth of him, and offered him gold and green woods for it, but Boots wouldn't sell it at any price. "But if I may have leave to lie on the bench by the Prince's bedside tonight, she shall have the cloth. But if she's afraid, she is welcome to set 4 men to watch inside the room." Yes, the Princess agreed to this, so Boots lay down on the bench by the bedside, and the 4 men watched. But if the Princess hadn't much sleep the night before, she had much less this, for she could scarce get a wink of sleep. There she lay wide awake, looking at the lovely lad the whole night through, and after all the night seemed too short. Next morning Boots was rowed off again to the Beggar's Island, though sorely against the Prince's will, so happy was she to be near him. But it was past praying for, to the island he must go, and there was an end of it. But when those who brought the food to the beggars came with the porridge scrapings and cheese parings, there wasn't one of them who would even look at what the king sent, and those who brought it didn't wonder either, though they all thought it strange that none of them were thirsty. But just then one of the king's guards smelled out that the lad who owned the scissors and the tablecloth had a tap besides, which, if one only turned it a little, gave out the rarest drink, both ale and mead and wine. So when he came back to the palace, he couldn't keep his mouth shut this time any more than before. He went about telling high and low about the tap, and how easy it was to draw all sorts of drink out of it. And as for that mead and ale, I've never tasted the like of them in the king's palace. Honey and syrup are nothing to them for sweetness. So when the Princess heard that, she was all for getting the tap, and was nothing loath to strike a bargain with the owner either. So she went again to the king, and begged him to send a messenger to the Beggar's Isle after the lad who had owned the scissors and cloth, for now he had another thing worth having, she said. And when the king heard it was a tap that was good to give the best ale and wine anyone could drink when one gave it a turn, he wasn't long in sending the messenger, I should think. So when Boots came up to the palace, the princess asked whether it were true he had a tap which could do such and such things. Yes, he had such a tap in his waistcoat pocket, said Boots. But when the princess wished with all her might to buy it, Boots said, as he had said twice before, he wouldn't sell it, even if the princess bade half the kingdom for it. But all the same, said Boots, if I may have leave to sleep on the princess' bed tonight, outside the quilt, she shall have my tap. I'll not do her any harm, but if she's afraid, she may set 8 men to watch in her room. Oh, no, said the princess, there was no need of that. She knew him now so well. And so Boots lay outside the prince's bed that night, but if she had not slept much the 2 nights before, she had less sleep that night, for she couldn't shut her eyes the livelong night, but lay and looked at Boots, who lay alongside her outside the quilt. So when she got up in the morning, and they were going to row Boots back to the island, she begged them to hold hard a little bit, and in she ran to the king, and begged him so prettily to let her have Boots for a husband. She was so fond of him, and unless she had him, she did not care to live. Well, well, said the king, you shall have him if you must, for he who has such things is just as rich as you are. So Boots got the princess and half the kingdom. The other half he was to have when the king died, and so everything went smooth and well. But as for his brothers, who had always been so bad to him, he packed them off to the Beggar's Island. There, said Boots, perhaps they may find out which is best off, the man who has his pockets full of money, or the man whom all women fall in love with. Nor, to tell you the truth, do I think it would help them much to wander about upon the Beggar's Island, pulling pieces of money out of their pockets. And so, if Boots hasn't taken them off the island, there they are still walking about to this very day, eating cheese parings and the scrapings of the porridge pots. End of section 43.
Of Popular Tales from the Norse.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Deborah Cornell on July 12, 2008 in Greenbank, Washington. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent.
Section 44.
The 3 Billy Goats Gruff. Once on a time there were 3 billy goats, who were to go up the hillside to make themselves fat, and the name of all 3 was Gruff. On the way up was a bridge over a burn they had to cross, and under the bridge lived a great ugly troll with eyes as big as saucers and a nose as long as a poker. So first of all came the youngest billy goat Gruff up to cross the bridge. Trip, trap, went the bridge. "Who's that, tripping over my bridge?" roared the troll. "Oh, it is only I, the teeniest billy goat Gruff, and I'm going up the hillside to make myself fat," said the billy goat with such a small voice. "Now I'm coming to gobble you up," said the troll. "Oh no, pray don't take me. I'm too little, that I am," said the billy goat. "Wait a bit till the second billy goat Gruff comes. He's much bigger." "Well, be off with you," said the Troll. A little while after came the second billy goat Gruff to cross the bridge. Trip, trap, went the bridge. "Who's that tripping over my bridge?" roared the Troll. "Oh, it's the second billy goat Gruff, and I'm going up the hill to make myself fat," said the billy goat, who hadn't such a small voice. "Now I'm coming to gobble you up," said the Troll. "Oh no, don't take me. Wait a little till the big billy goat Gruff comes. He's much bigger." "Very well, be off with you," said the Troll. But just then came the big billy goat Gruff. Trip, trap, went the bridge, for the billy goat was so heavy that the bridge creaked and groaned under him. "Who's that tramping over my bridge?" roared the Troll. "It is I, the big billy goat Gruff," said the billy goat, who had an ugly hoarse voice of his own. "Now I'm coming to gobble you up," roared the Troll. "Well, come along, I've got 2 spears, and I'll poke your eyeballs out your ears. I've got besides 2 curling stones, and I'll crush you to bits, body and bones." That was what the billy goat said, and so he flew at the Troll and poked his eyes out with his 2 horns, and crunched him to bits, body and bones, and tossed him out into the burn. And after that he went up the hillside. There the billy goats got so fat they were scarce able to walk home again, and if the fat hasn't fallen off them, why they're still fat, and so snip, snap, snout, this tale's told out.
End of section 44.
Section 45 of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Fetterman. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent. Section 45. Well done and ill paid. Once on a time there was a man who had to drive his sledge to the wood for fuel, so a bear met him. "Out with your horse," said the bear, "or I'll strike all your sheep dead by summer." "Oh, heaven help me then," said the man. "There's not a stick of firewood in the house. You must let me drive home a load of fuel, else we shall be frozen to death. I'll bring the horse to you tomorrow morning." Yes, on those terms he might drive the wood home. That was a bargain. But Bruin said, if he didn't come back, he should lose all his sheep by summer. So the man got the wood on the sledge and rattled homewards, but he wasn't overpleased at the bargain, you may fancy. So just then a fox met him. "Why, what's the matter?" said the fox. "Why are you so down in the mouth?" "Oh, if you want to know," said the man, "I met a bear up yonder in the wood, and I had to give my word to him to bring Dobbin back tomorrow, at this very hour, for if he didn't get him, he said he would tear all my sheep to death by summer." "Stuff, nothing worse than that," said the fox. "If you'll give me your fattest wether, I'll soon set you free, see if I don't." Yes, the man gave his word and swore he would keep it too. "Well, when you come with Dobbin tomorrow for the bear," said the fox, "I'll make a clatter up in that heap of stones yonder, and so when the bear asks what that noise is, you must say, ''Tis Peter the Marksman, who is the best shot in the world,' and after that you must help yourself." Next day off set the man, and when he met the bear, something began to make a clatter up in this heap of stones. "Hist, what is that?" said the bear. "Oh, that's Peter the Marksman, to be sure," said the man. "He's the best shot in the world. I know him by his voice." "Have you seen any bears about here, Eric?" shouted out a voice in the wood. "Say no," said the bear. "No, I haven't seen any," said Eric. "What's that, then, that stands alongside your sledge?" bawled out the voice in the wood. "Say it's an old fir stump," said the bear. "Oh, it's only an old fir stump," said the man. "Such fir stumps we take in our country and roll them on our sledges," bawled out the voice. "If you can't do it yourself, I'll come and help you." "Say you can help yourself and roll me up on the sledge," said the bear. "No, thank ye, I can help myself well enough," said the man. and rolled the bear onto the sledge.
"Such fir stumps we always bind fast on our sledges in our part of the world," bawled out the voice. "Shall I come and help you?"
"Say you can help yourself and bind me fast, do," said the bear.
"No thanks, I can help myself well enough," said the man, who set to binding Bruin fast with all the ropes he had, so that at last the bear couldn't stir a paw. "Such fir stumps we always drive our axes into, in our part of the world," bawled out the voice, "for then we guide them better going down the steep pitches."
"Pretend to drive your axe into me, do now," said the bear. Then the man took up his axe, and at one blow split the bear's skull, so that Bruin lay dead in a trice. And so the man and the fox were great friends and on best terms. But when they came near the farm, the fox said, "I've no mind to go right home with you, for I can't say I like your tykes.
"So I'll just wait here, and you can bring the wether to me. But mind and pick out one nice and fat."
Yes, the man would be sure to do that, and thanked the fox much for his help.
So, when he had put up Dobbin, he went across to the sheep stall. "Whither away now?" asked his old dame.
"Oh," said the man, "I'm only going to the sheep stall to fetch a fat wether for that cunning fox who set our Dobbin free. I gave him my word I would." "Whither indeed," said the old dame. "Never a one shall that thief of a fox get. Haven't we got Dobbin safe, and the bear into the bargain?
And as for the fox, I'll be bound he's stolen more of our geese than the wether is worth. And if he hasn't stolen them, he will. No, no. Take a brace of your swiftest hounds in a sack, and slip them loose after him, and then, perhaps, we shall be rid of this robbing Reynard."
Well, the man thought that good advice, so he took 2 fleet red hounds and put them in a sack and set off with them. "Have you brought the wether?" said the fox.
"Yes, come and take it," said the man, as he untied the sack and let slip the hounds. "Huff!" said the fox, and gave a great spring. True as what the old saw says, well done is often ill paid. And now, too, I see the truth of another saying, the worst foes are those of one's own house. That was what the fox said as he ran off, and saw the red foxy hounds at his heels.
End of section 45. Recording by David Fetterman.
Section 46 of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Roger Moline. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent. Section 46. The Husband Who Was to Mind the House. Once on a time there was a man, so surly and cross he never thought his wife did anything right in the house. So one evening, in haymaking time, he came home scolding and swearing, and showing his teeth and making a dust. "Dear love, don't be so angry, there's a good man," said his goody. "Tomorrow let's change our work. I'll go out with the mowers and mow, and you shall mind the house at home." Yes, the husband thought, that would do very well. He was quite willing, he said. So early next morning his goody took a scythe over her neck and went out into the hayfield with the mowers and began to mow, but the man was to mind the house and do the work at home. First of all he wanted to churn the butter. But when he had churned a while he got thirsty, and went down to the cellar to tap a barrel of ale. So just when he had knocked in the bung and was putting the tap into the cask, he heard overhead the pig come into the kitchen. Then off he ran up the cellar steps with the tap in his hand as fast as he could to look after the pig, lest it should upset the churn. But when he got up and saw the pig had already knocked the churn over, and stood there, routing and grunting amongst the cream which was running all over the floor, he got so wild with rage that he quite forgot the ale barrel, and ran at the pig as hard as he could. He caught it, too, just as it ran out of doors, and gave it such a kick that Piggy lay for dead on the spot. Then, all at once, he remembered he had the tap in his hand, but when he got down to the cellar, every drop of ale had run out of the cask. Then he went into the dairy and found enough cream left to fill the churn again, and so he began to churn, for butter they must have at dinner. When he had churned a bit, he remembered that their milking cow was still shut up in the byre, and hadn't had a bit to eat or a drop to drink all the morning, though the sun was high. Then all at once he thought 'twas too far to take her down to the meadow, so he'd just get her up on the housetop, for the house, you must know, was thatched with sods, and a fine crop of grass was growing there. Now their house lay close up against a steep down, and he thought if he laid a plank across to the thatch at the back he'd easily get the cow up. But still he couldn't leave the churn, for there was his little babe crawling about on the floor, and if I leave it, he thought, the child is safe to upset it. So he took the churn on his back and went out with it, but then he thought he'd better first water the cow before he turned her out on the thatch, so he took up a bucket to draw water out of the well. But as he stooped down at the well's brink, all the cream ran out of the churn over his shoulders and so down into the well. Now it was near dinner time, and he hadn't even got the butter yet, so he thought he'd best boil the porridge, and filled the pot with water and hung it over the fire. When he had done that, he thought the cow might perhaps fall off the thatch and break her legs or her neck. So he got up on the house to tie her up. One end of the rope he made fast to the cow's neck, and the other he slipped down the chimney and tied around his own thigh. And he had to make haste, for the water now began to boil in the pot, and he had still to grind the oatmeal. So he began to grind away. But while he was hard at it, down fell the cow off the housetop after all, and as she fell, she dragged the man up the chimney by the rope. There he stuck fast, and as for the cow, she hung halfway down the wall, swinging between heaven and earth, for she could neither get down nor up. And now the goody had waited 7 lengths and 7 breadths for her husband to come and call them home to dinner, but never a call they had. At last she thought she had waited long enough, and went home. But when she got there, and saw the cow hanging in such an ugly place, she ran up and cut the rope in two with her scythe. But as she did this, down came her husband out of the chimney, and so when his old dame came inside the kitchen, there she found him standing on his head in the porridge pot. End of section 46. Recording by Roger Moline.
Section 47 of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Sharon Riskadal. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent. Section 47. Dapplegrim. Once on a time there was a rich couple who had 12 sons, but the youngest, when he was grown up, said he wouldn't stay any longer at home, but be off into the world to try his luck. His father and mother said he did very well at home, and had better stay where he was. But no, he couldn't rest. Away he must and would go. So at last they gave him leave, and when he had walked a good bit, he came to a king's palace, where he asked for a place, and got it. Now the daughter of the king of that land had been carried off into the hill by a troll, and the king had no other children, so he and all his land were in great grief and sorrow, and the king gave his word that anyone who could set her free should have the princess and half the kingdom. But there was no one who could do it, though many tried. So when the lad had been there a year or so, he longed to go home again and see his father and mother, and back he went. But when he got home, his father and mother were dead, and his brothers had shared all that the old people owned between them, and so there was nothing left for the lad. "Shan't I have anything at all, then, out of father's and mother's goods?" said the lad. "Who could tell you were still alive when you went gadding and wandering about so long?" said his brothers. "But all the same, there are 12 mares up on the hill which we haven't yet shared among us. If you choose to take them for your share, you're quite welcome." Yes, the lad was quite content, so he thanked his brothers and went at once up on the hill, where the 12 mares were out at grass. And when he got up there and found them, each of them had a foal at her side, and one of them had besides, along with her, a big dapple-gray foal, which was so sleek that the sun shone from its coat. "A fine fellow you are, my little foal", said the lad. "Yes", said the foal, "but if you'll only kill all the other foals, so that I may run and suck all the mares 1 year more, you'll see how big and sleek I will be then." Yes, the lad was ready to do that, so he killed all those 12 foals and went home again. So when he came back the next year to look after his foal and mares, the foal was so fat and sleek that the sun shone from its coat, and it had grown so big the lad had hard work to mount it. As for the mares, they had each of them another foal. "Well, it's quite plain I lost nothing by letting you suck all my 12 mares", said the lad to the yearling, "but now you're big enough to come along with me." "No", said the colt, "I must bide here a year longer, and now kill all the 12 foals, that I may suck all the mares this year too, and you'll see how big and sleek I'll be by summer." Yes, the lad did that, and the next year when he went up on the hill to look after his colt and the mares, each mare had her foal, but the dapple-coat was so tall the lad couldn't reach up to his crest when he wanted to feel how fat he was, and so sleek he was too, that his coat glistened in the sunshine. "Big and beautiful you were last year, my colt", said the lad, "but this year you're far grander. There's no such horse in the king's stable, but now you must come along with me." "No", said Dapple again, "I must stay here 1 year more. Kill the 12 foals as before, that I may suck the mares the whole year, and then just come and look at me when the summer comes." Yes, the lad did that. He killed the foals and went away home. But when he went up next year to look after Dapple and the mares, he was quite astonished. So tall and stout and sturdy he never thought a horse could be, for Dapple had to lie down on all fours before the lad could bestride him, and it was hard work to get up even then, although he lay flat, and his coat was so smooth and sleek the sunbeams shone from it as from a looking-glass. This time Dapple was willing enough to follow the lad, so he jumped up on his back, and when he came riding home to his brothers, they all clapped their hands and crossed themselves, for such a horse they had never heard of nor seen before. "If you will only get me the best shoes you can for my horse, and the grandest saddle and bridle that are to be found", said the lad, "you may have my 12 mares that graze upon the hill yonder, and their 12 foals into the bargain, for you must know that this year too every mare had her foal." Yes, his brothers were ready to do that, and so the lad got such strong shoes under his horse that the stones flew high aloft as he rode away across the hills, and he had a golden saddle and a golden bridle which gleamed and glistened a long way off. "Now we're off to the king's palace", said Dapplegrim, that was his name, "but mind you ask the king for a good stable and good fodder for me." Yes, the lad said he would mind. He'd be sure not to forget, and when he rode off from his brother's house, you may be sure it wasn't long, with such a horse under him, before he got to the king's palace. When he came there, the king was standing on the steps, and stared at the man who came riding along. "Nay, nay", said he, "such a man and such a horse I never yet saw in all my life." But when the lad asked if he could get a place in the king's household, the king was so glad he was ready to jump and dance as he stood on the steps. Well, they said perhaps he might get a place there. "Ay", said the lad, "but I must have good stable room for my horse, and fodder that one can trust." Yes, he should have meadow hay and oats, as much as Dapple could cram, and all the other knights had to lead their horses out of the stable, that Dapplegrim might stand alone and have it all to himself. But it wasn't long before all the others in the king's household began to be jealous of the lad, and there was no end to the bad things they would have done to him if they had only dared. At last they thought of telling the king he had said he was man enough to set the king's daughter free, whom the Troll had long since carried away into the hill, if he only chose. The king called the lad before him, and said he had heard the lad said he was good to do so and so, so now he must go and do it. If he did it, he knew how the king had promised his daughter and half the kingdom, and that promise would be faithfully kept. If he didn't, he should be killed. The lad kept on saying he never said any such thing, but it was no good. The king wouldn't even listen to him, and so the end of it was he was forced to say he'd go and try. So he went into the stable, down in the mouth and heavy-hearted, and then Dapplegrim asked him at once why he was in such dumps. Then the lad told him all, and how he couldn't tell which way to turn. For as for setting the Princess free, that's downright stuff. "Oh, but it might be done, perhaps", said Dapplegrim. "I'll help you, though, but you must first have me well shod. You must go and ask for 10 pound of iron, and 12 pound of steel for the shoes, and 1 smith to hammer, and another to hold." Yes, the lad did that, and got for answer yes. He got both the iron, and he steel, and the smiths, and so Dapplegrim was shod both strong and well, and off went the lad from the courtyard in a cloud of dust. But when he came to the hill into which the Princess had been carried, the pinch was how to get up the steep wall of rock where the Troll's cave was, in which the Princess had been hid. For you must know the hill stood straight up and down, right on end, as upright as a house wall, and as smooth as a sheet of glass. The first time the lad went at it, he got a little way up, but then Dapple's forelegs slipped, and down they went again, with a sound like thunder on the hill. The second time he rode at it, he got some way further up, but then one foreleg slipped, and down they went with a crash like a landslip. But the third time Dapple said, "Now we must show our mettle", and went at it again till the stones flew heaven high about them, and so they got up. Then the lad rode right into the cave at full speed, and caught up the Princess, and threw her over his saddle-bow, and out and down again before the Troll had time even to get on his legs, and so the Princess was freed. When the lad came back to the palace, the king was both happy and glad to get his daughter back, that you may well believe. But somehow or other, though I don't know how, the others about the court had so brought it about that the king was angry with the lad after all. "Thanks you shall have for freeing my Princess", said he to the lad, when he brought the Princess into the hall and made his bow. "She ought to be mine as well as yours, for you're a word-fast man, I hope", said the lad. "Aye, aye", said the king, "have her you shall, since I said it. But first of all, you must make the sun shine into my palace hall." Now you must know there was a high steep ridge of rock, close outside the windows, which threw such a shade over the hall that never a sunbeam shone into it. "That wasn't in our bargain", answered the lad, "but I see this is past praying against. I must even go and try my luck, for the Princess I must and will have." So down he went to Dapple, and told him what the king wanted, and Dapplegrim thought it might easily be done, but first of all he must be new shod, and for that 10 pound of iron and 12 pound of steel besides were needed, and 2 smiths, one to hammer and the other to hold, and then they'd soon get the sun to shine into the palace hall. So when the lad asked for all these things, he got them at once. The king couldn't say nay for very shame, and so Dapplegrim got new shoes, and such shoes! Then the lad jumped upon his back, and off they went again, and for every leap that Dapplegrim gave, down sank the ridge 15 ells into the earth, and so they went on till there was nothing left of the ridge for the king to see. When the lad got back to the king's palace, he asked the king if the Princess were not his now, for now no one could say that the sun didn't shine into the hall. But then the others set the king's back up again, and he answered the lad should have her, of course. He had never thought of anything else, but first of all he must get as grand a horse for the bride to ride on to church as the bridegroom had himself. The lad said the king hadn't spoken a word about this before, and that he thought he had now fairly earned the Princess. But the king held to his own, and more, if the lad couldn't do that, he should lose his life. That was what the king said. So the lad went down to the stable in doleful dumps, as you may well fancy, and there he told Dapplegrim all about it, how the king had laid that task on him to find the bride as good a horse as the bridegroom had himself, else he would lose his life. "But that's not so easy", he said, "for your match isn't to be found in the wide world." "Oh yes, I have a match", said Dapplegrim, "but 'tisn't so easy to find him, for he abides in hell. Still, we'll try. And now you must go up to the king and ask for new shoes for me, 10 pound of iron and 12 pound of steel, and 2 smiths, one to hammer and one to hold. And mind you see that the points and ends of these shoes are sharp. And 12 sacks of rye, and 12 sacks of barley, and 12 slaughtered oxen we must have with us, and mind, we must have the 12 ox hides, with 1200 spikes driven into each, and let me see, a big tar barrel. That's all we want." So the lad went up to the king and asked for all that Dapplegrim had said, and the king again thought he couldn't say nay for shame's sake, and so the lad got all he wanted. Well, he jumped up on Dapplegrim's back and rode away from the palace, and when they had ridden far, far over the hill and heath, Dapple asked, "Do you hear anything?" "Yes, I hear an awful hissing and rustling up in the air", said the lad. "I think I'm getting afraid." "That's all the wild birds that fly through the wood. They are sent to stop us. But just cut a hole in the corn sacks, and then they'll have so much to do with the corn, they'll forget us quite." Yes, the lad did that. He cut holes in the corn sacks, so that the rye and barley ran out on all sides. Then all the wild birds that were in the wood came flying round them so thick that the sunbeams grew dark. But as soon as they saw the corn, they couldn't keep to their purpose, but flew down and began to pick and scratch at the rye and barley, and after that they began to fight among themselves. As for Dapplegrim and the lad, they forgot all about them, and did them no harm. So the lad rode on, far, far, over mountain and dale, over sandhills and moor. Then Dapplegrim began to prick up his ears again, and at last he asked the lad if he heard anything. "Yes, now I hear such an ugly roaring and howling in the wood all round, it makes me quite afraid." "Ah," said Dapplegrim, "that's all the wild beasts that range through the wood, and they're sent out to stop us. But just cast out the 12 carcasses of the oxen, that will give them enough to do, and so they'll forget us outright." Yes, the lad cast out the carcasses, and then all the wild beasts in the wood, both bears and wolves and lions, all fell beasts of all kinds, came after them. But when they saw the carcasses, they began to fight for them among themselves, till blood flowed in the streams. But Dapplegrim and the lad, they quite forgot. So the lad rode far away, and they changed the landscape many, many times, for Dapplegrim didn't let the grass grow under him, as you may fancy. At last Dapple gave a great neigh. "Do you hear anything?" he said. "Yes, I hear something like a colt neighing loud, a long, long way off", answered the lad. "That's a full-grown colt then", said Dapplegrim, "if we hear him neigh so loud, such a long way off." After that they travelled a good bit, changing the landscape once or twice maybe. Then Dapplegrim gave another neigh. "Now listen, and tell me if you hear anything", he said. "Yes, now I hear a neigh, like a full-grown horse", answered the lad. "Aye, aye", said Dapplegrim, "you'll hear him once again soon, and then you'll hear he's got a voice of his own." So they travelled on, and changed the landscape once or twice perhaps, and then Dapplegrim neighed the third time. But before he could ask the lad if he heard anything, something gave such a neigh across the heathy hillside, the lad thought hill and rock would surely be rent asunder. "Now he's here", said Dapplegrim. "Make haste now, and throw the ox hide, with the spikes in them, over me, and throw down the tar barrel on the plain, then climb up into that great spruce fir yonder. When it comes, fire will flash out of both nostrils, and then the tar barrel will catch fire. Now mind what I say. If the flame rises, I win; if it falls, I lose. But if you see me winning, take and cast the bridle, you must take it off me, over its head, and then it will be tame enough." So just as the lad had done, throwing the ox hides with the spikes over Dapplegrim, and had cast down the tar barrel on the plain, and had got well up into the spruce fir, up galloped a horse, with fire flashing out of his nostrils, and the flame caught the tar barrel at once. Then Dapplegrim and the strange horse began to fight till the stones flew heaven high. They fought and bit and kicked, both with forefeet and hind feet, and sometimes the lad could see them, and sometimes he couldn't. But at last the flame began to rise, for wherever the strange horse kicked or bit, he met the spiked hides, and at last he had to yield. When the lad saw that, he wasn't long in getting down from the tree, and in throwing the bridle over its head, and then it was so tame you could hold it with a pack thread. And what do you think? That horse was dappled too, and so like Dapplegrim you couldn't tell which was which. Then the lad bestrode the new Dapple he had broken, and rode home to the palace, and old Dapplegrim ran loose by his side. So when he got home, there stood the king out in the yard. "Can you tell me now", said the lad, "which is the horse I have caught and broken, and which is the one I had before? If you can't, I think your daughter is fairly mine." Then the king went and looked at both Dapples, high and low, before and behind, but there wasn't a hair on one which wasn't on the other as well. "No", said the king, "that I can't, and since you've got my daughter such a grand horse for her wedding, you shall have her with all my heart. But still we'll have one trial more, just to see whether you are fated to have her. first she shall hide herself twice, and then you shall hide yourself twice. If you can find out her hiding place, and she can't find out yours, why then you're fated to have her, and so you shall have her." "That's not in the bargain either", said the lad, "but we must just try, since it must be so." And so the Princess went off to hide herself first. So she turned herself into a duck, and lay swimming on a pond that was close to the palace. But the lad only ran down to the stable and asked Dapplegrim what she had done with herself. "Oh, you only need to take your gun", said Dapplegrim, "and go down to the brink of the pond, and aim at the duck which lies swimming about there, and she'll soon show herself." So the lad snatched up his gun and ran off to the pond. "I'll just take a pop at this duck", he said, and began to aim at it. "Nay, nay, dear friend, don't shoot. It's I", said the Princess. So he had found her once. The second time the Princess turned herself into a loaf of bread, and laid herself on the table among 4 other loaves, and so like was she to the others, no one could say which was which. But the lad went again down to the stable to Dapplegrim, and said how the Princess had hidden herself again, and he couldn't tell at all what became of her. "Oh, just take and sharpen a good bread knife", said Dapplegrim, "and do as if you were going to cut in two the 3rd loaf on the left hand of those 4 loaves which are lying on the dresser in the king's kitchen, and you'll find her soon enough." Yes, he was down in the kitchen in no time, and began to sharpen the biggest bread knife he could lay hands on. Then he caught hold of the 3rd loaf on the left hand, and put the knife to it as though he was going to cut it in two. "I'll just have a slice off this loaf", he said. "Nay, dear friend", said the Princess, "don't cut, it's I." So he had found her twice. Then he was to go and hide, but he and Dapplegrim had settled it all so well beforehand, it wasn't easy to find him. First he turned himself into a tick, and hid himself in Dapplegrim's left nostril, and the Princess went about hunting him everywhere, high and low. At last she wanted to go into Dapplegrim's stall, but he began to bite and kick, so that she daren't go near him, and so she couldn't find the lad. "Well", she said, "since I can't find you, you must show where you are yourself." And in a trice the lad stood there on the stable floor. The second time Dapplegrim told him again what to do, and then he turned himself into a clod of earth, and stuck himself between Dapple's hoof and shoe on the near forefoot. So the Princess hunted up and down, out and in, everywhere. At last she came into the stable, and wanted to go into Dapplegrim's loose box. This time he let her come up to him, and she pried high and low, but under his hoofs she couldn't come, for he stood firm as a rock on his feet, and so she couldn't find the lad. "Well, you must just show yourself, for I'm sure I can't find you", said the Princess, and as she spoke the lad stood by her side on the stable floor. "Now you are mine indeed", said the lad, "for now you can see I'm fated to have you." This he said both to the father and daughter. "Yes, it is so fated", said the king, "so it must be." Then they got ready the wedding in right down earnest, and lost no time about it, and the lad got on Dapplegrim, and the Princess on Dapplegrim's match, and then you may fancy they were not long on their way to the church. End of section 47.
Of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Al Dano. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent. Section 48. Farmer Weathersky. Once on a time there was a man and his wife who had an only son, and his name was Jack. The old dame thought it high time for her son to go out into the world to learn a trade, and bade her husband be off with him.
"But all you do," she said, "mind you bind him to someone who can teach him to be master above all masters."
And with that she put some food and a roll of tobacco into a bag, and packed them off. Well, they went to many masters, but one and all said they could make the lad as good as themselves, but better they couldn't make him. So when the man came home again to his wife with that answer, she said,
"I don't care what you make of him, but this I say and stick to. You must bind him to someone where he can learn to be master above all masters."
And with that she packed up more food and another roll of tobacco, and father and son had to be off again. Now when they had walked a while, they got upon the ice, and there they met a man who came whisking along in a sledge, and drove a black horse. "Whither away?" said the man. "Well," said the father, "I'm going to bind my son to someone who is good to teach him a trade, but my old dame comes of such fine folk, she will have taught him to be master above all masters." "Well met, then," said the driver. "I'm just the man for your money, for I'm looking out for such an apprentice. Up with you behind," he added to the lad, and whisk, off they went, both of them, and sledge and horse, right up into the air. "Nay, nay," cried the lad's father, "you haven't told me your name, nor where you live." "Oh," said the master, "I'm at home alike north and south and east and west, and my name's Farmer Weathersky. In a year and a day you may come here again, and then I'll tell you if I like him." So away they went through the air, and were soon out of sight. So when the man got home, his old dame asked what had become of her son. "Well," said the man, "heaven knows, I'm sure I don't. They went up aloft." And so he told her what had happened. But when the old dame heard that her husband couldn't tell at all when her son's apprenticeship would be out, nor whither he had gone, she packed him off again, and gave him another bag of food and another roll of tobacco. So when he had walked a bit, he came to a great wood, which stretched on and on all day as he walked through it. When it got dark he saw a great light, and he went towards it. After a long, long time he came to a little butt under a rock, and outside stood an old hag drawing water out of a well with her nose, so long was it. "Good evening, mother," said the man.
"The same to you," said the old hag. "It's hundreds of years since anyone called me mother."
"Can I have lodging here tonight?" asked the man.
"No, that you can't," said she.
But then the man pulled out his roll of tobacco, lighted his pipe, and gave the old dame a whiff and a pinch of snuff. Then she was so happy she began to dance for joy, and the end was, she gave the man leave to stop the night. So the next morning he began to ask after Farmer Weathersky. No, she never heard tell of him, but she ruled over all the four-footed beasts. Perhaps some of them might know him. So she played them all home with a pipe she had, and asked them all. But there wasn't one of them who knew anything about Farmer Weathersky.
"Well," said the old hag, "there are 3 sisters of us. Maybe one of the other 2 know where he lives. I'll lend you my horse and my sledge, and then you'll be at her house by night. But it's at least 300 miles off the nearest way."
Then the man started off, and at night reached the house, and when he came there stood another old hag before the door, drawing water out of the well with her nose. "Good evening, mother," said the man.
"Same to you," said she. "It's hundreds of years since anyone called me mother."
"Can I lodge here tonight?" asked the man.
"No,"
said the old hag. But he took out his roll of tobacco, lighted his pipe, and gave the old dame a whiff, and a good pinch of snuff besides, on the back of her hand. Then she was so happy she began to jump and dance for joy, and so the man got leave to stay the night. When that was over, he began to ask after Farmer Weathersky. No, she had never heard tell of him, but she ruled all the fish in the sea. Perhaps some of them might know something about him. So she played them all home with a pipe she had, and asked them. But there wasn't one of them who knew anything about Farmer Weathersky.
"Well, well," said the old hag, "there's one sister of us left. Maybe she knows something about him. She lives 600 miles off, but I'll lend you my horse and sledge, and then you'll get there by nightfall."
Then the man started off, and reached the house by nightfall, and there he found another old hag who stood before the grate, and stirred the fire with her nose, so long and tough it was. "Good evening, mother," said the man.
"The same to you," said the old hag. "It's hundreds of years since anyone called me mother."
"Can I lodge here tonight?" asked the man.
"No,"
said the old hag. Then the man pulled out his roll of tobacco again, and lighted his pipe, and gave the old hag such a pinch of snuff it covered the whole back of her hand. Then she got so happy she began to dance for joy, and so the man got leave to stay. But when the night was over, he began to ask after Farmer Weathersky. She never heard tell of him, she said, but she ruled over all the birds of the air, and so she played them all home with a pipe she had, and when she had mustered them all, the eagle was missing. But a little while after he came flying home, and when she asked him, he said he had just come straight from Farmer Weathersky. Then the old hag said he must guide the man thither, but the eagle said he must have something to eat first, and besides he must rest till the next day. He was so tired with flying that long way he could scarce rise from the earth. So when he had eaten his fill and taken a good rest, the old hag pulled a feather out of the eagle's tail and put the man there in its stead. So the eagle flew off with the man, and flew, but they didn't reach Farmer Weathersky's house before midnight. So when they got there, the eagle said, "There are heaps of dead bodies lying about outside, but you mustn't mind them. Inside the house every man jack of them are so sound asleep 'twill be hard work to wake them. But you must go straight to the table drawer and take out of it 3 crumbs of bread, and when you hear someone snoring loud, pull 3 feathers out of his head. He won't wake for all that." So the man did as he was told, and after he had taken the crumbs of bread, he pulled out the first feather. "Oof!" growled Farmer Weathersky, for it was he who snored. So the man pulled out another feather. "Oof!" he growled again. But when he pulled out the third, Farmer Weathersky roared so, the man thought the roof and the wall would have flown asunder, but for all that the snorer slept on. After that the eagle told him what he was to do. He went to the yard, and there at the stable door he stumbled against a big grey stone, and that he lifted up. Beneath it lay 3 chips of wood, and those he picked up too. Then he knocked at the stable door, and it opened of itself. Then he threw down the 3 crumbs of bread, and a hare came and ate them up. That hare he caught and kept. After that the eagle bade him pull 3 feathers out of his tail, and put the hare, the stone, the chips, and himself there instead, and then he would fly away home with them all. So when the eagle had flown a long way, he lighted on a rock to rest. "Do you see anything?" it asked. "Yes," said the man. "I see a flock of crows coming flying after us." "We'd better be off again, then," said the eagle, who flew away. After a while it asked again, "Do you see anything now?" "Yes," said the man. "Now the crows are close behind us." "Drop now the 3 feathers you pulled out of his head," said the eagle. Well, the man dropped the feathers, and as soon as ever he dropped them, they became a flock of ravens which drove the crows home again. Then the eagle flew on far away with the man, and at last it lighted on another stone to rest. "Do you see anything?" it said. "I'm not sure," said the man. "I fancy I see something coming far, far away." "We'd better get on, then," said the eagle. After a while it said again, "Do you see anything?" "Yes," said the man. "Now he's close at our heels." "Now you must let fall the chips of wood which you took from under the grey stone at the stable door," said the eagle. Yes, the man let them fall, and they grew at once into a tall, thick wood, so that Farmer Weathersky had to go back home to fetch an axe to hew his way through. While he did this, the eagle flew ever so far, but when it got tired, it lighted on a fir to rest. "Do you see anything?" it said. "Well, I'm not sure," said the man, "but I fancy I catch a glimpse of something far away." "We'd best be off, then," said the eagle, and off it flew as fast as it could. After a while it said, "Do you see anything now?" "Yes, now he's close behind us," said the man. "Now you must drop the big stone you lifted up at the stable door," said the eagle. The man did so, and as it fell it became a great high mountain, which Farmer Weathersky had to break his way through. When he had got half through the mountain, he tripped and broke one of his legs, and so he had to limp home again and patch it up. But while he was doing this, the eagle flew away to the man's house with him and the hare, and as soon as they got home, the man went into the churchyard and sprinkled Christian mould over the hare, and lo! It turned into Jack, his son. Well, you may fancy the old dame was glad to get her son again, but still she wasn't easy in her mind about his trade, and she wouldn't rest until he gave her a proof that he was master above all masters. So when the fair came round, the lad changed himself into a bay horse and told his father to lead him to the fair. "Now when anyone comes," he said, "to buy me, you may ask $100 for me, but mind you don't forget to take the headstall off me. If you do, Farmer Weathersky will keep me forever, for he it is who will come to deal with you." So it turned out, up came a horse dealer who had a great wish to deal for the horse, and he gave $100 down for him. But when the bargain was struck, and Jack's father had pocketed the money, the horse dealer wanted to have the headstall. "Nay, nay," said the man, "there's nothing about that in the bargain, and besides you can't have the headstall, for I've other horses at home to bring to town tomorrow." So each went his way, but they hadn't gone far before Jack took his own shape and ran away. And when his father got home, there sat Jack in the ingle. Next day he turned himself into a brown horse, and told his father to drive him to the fair. "And when anyone comes to buy me, you may ask $200 for me. He'll give that, and treat you besides. But whatever you do, and however much you drink, don't forget to take the headstall off me, else you'll never set eyes on me again." So all happened as he had said. The man got $200 for the horse and a glass of drink besides. And when the buyer and seller parted, it was as much as he could do to remember to take off the headstall. But the buyer and the horse hadn't got far on the road before Jack took his own shape, and when the man got home, there sat Jack in the ingle. The third day it was the same story over again, the lad turned himself into a black horse, and told his father someone would come and bid $300 for him, and fill his skin with meat and drink besides. But however much he ate or drank, he was to mind and not forget to take the headstall off, else he'd have to stay with Farmer Weathersky all his life long. "No, no, I'll not forget, never fear," said the man. So when he came to the fair he got $300 for the horse, and as it wasn't to be a dry bargain, Farmer Weathersky made him drink so much that he quite forgot to take the headstall off, and away went Farmer Weathersky with the horse. Now when he had gone a little way, Farmer Weathersky thought he would just stop and have another glass of brandy. So he put a barrel of red-hot nails under his horse's nose, and a sieve of oats under his tail, hung the halter upon a hook, and went into the inn. So the horse stood there and stamped and pawed and snorted and reared. Just then out came a lassie who thought it a shame to treat a horse so.
"Oh, poor beastie," she said, "what a cruel master you must have to treat you so."
And as she said this, she pulled the halter off the hook, so that the horse might turn around and taste the oats. "I'm after you!" roared Farmer Weathersky, who came rushing out of the door. But the horse had already shaken off the headstall and jumped into a duck pond, where he turned himself into a tiny fish. In went Farmer Weathersky after him, and turned himself into a great pike. Then Jack turned himself into a dove, and Farmer Weathersky made himself into a hawk, and chased and struck at the dove. But just then a princess stood at the window of the palace and saw this struggle.
"Ah, poor dove," she cried, "if you only knew what I knew, you'd fly to me through this window."
So the dove came flying in through the window and turned itself into Jack again, who told his own tale.
"Turn yourself into a gold ring, and put yourself on my finger," said the princess.
"Nay, nay," said Jack, "that'll never do, for then Farmer Weathersky will make the king sick, and then there'll be no one who can make him well again until Farmer Weathersky comes and cures him, and then, for his fee, he'll ask for that gold ring."
"Then I'll say I had it from my mother, and can't part with it," said the princess.
Well, Jack turned himself into a gold ring and put himself on the princess's finger, and so Farmer Weathersky couldn't get at him. But then followed what the lad had foretold. The king fell sick, and there wasn't a doctor in the kingdom who could cure him till Farmer Weathersky came, and he asked for the ring off the princess's finger for his fee. So the king sent a messenger to the princess for the ring, but the princess said she wouldn't part with it. Her mother had left it her. When the king heard that, he flew into a rage and said he would have the ring whoever left it to her.
"Well," said the princess, "it's no good being cross about it. I can't get it off, and if you must have the ring, you must take my finger too."
"If you'll let me try, I'll soon get the ring off," said Farmer Weathersky.
"No thanks, I'll try myself,"
said the princess, and flew off to the grate and put ashes on her finger. Then the ring slipped off and was lost among the ashes. So Farmer Weathersky turned himself into a cock, who scratched and pecked after the ring in the grate, till he was up to his ears in ashes. But while he was doing this, Jack turned himself into a fox, and bit off the cock's head. And so, if the evil one was in Farmer Weathersky, it is all over with him now. End of section 48.
Section 49 of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Patty Marie in Istanbul. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent. Section 49. Lord Peter. Once upon a time was a poor couple, and they had nothing in the world but 3 sons. What names the 2 elder had I can't say, but the youngest was called Peter. So when their father and mother died, the sons were to share what was left, but there was nothing but a porridge pot, a griddle, and a cat. The eldest, who was to have the first choice, took the pot. For, said he, whenever I lend the pot to anyone to boil porridge, I can always get leave to scrape it. The second took the griddle. For, said he, whenever I lend it to anyone, I'll always get a morsel of dough to make a bannock. But the youngest had no choice left him. If he was to choose anything, it must be the cat. Well, said he, if I lend the cat to anyone, I shan't get much by that, for if Pussy gets a drop of milk, she'll want it all to herself. Still, I'd best take her along with me. I shouldn't like her to go about here and starve. So the brothers went out into the world to try their luck, and each took his own way. But when the youngest had gone a while, the cat said, "Now you shall have a good turn, because you wouldn't let me stay behind in the old cottage and starve. Now I'm off to the wood to lay hold of a fine fat head of game, and then you must go up to the king's palace that you see yonder, and say you are come with a little present for the king. And when he asks who sends it, you must say, 'Why, who should it be from but Lord Peter?'" Well, Peter hadn't waited long before the cat came back with a reindeer from the wood. She had jumped up on the reindeer's head between his horns and said, "If you don't go straight to the king's palace, I'll claw your eyes out." So the reindeer had to go, whether he liked it or no. And when Peter got to the palace, he went into the kitchen with the deer and said, "Here I'm come with a little present for the king, if he won't despise it." Then the king went out into the kitchen, and when he saw the fine plump reindeer, he was very glad. "But, my dear friend," he said, "who in the world is it that sends me such a fine gift?" "Oh," said Peter, "who should send it but Lord Peter?" "Lord Peter, Lord Peter," said the king, "pray tell me where he lives," for he thought it a shame not to know so great a man. But that was just what the lad wouldn't tell him. He daren't do it, he said, because his master had forbidden him. So the king gave him a good bit of money to drink his health, and bade him be sure and say all kind of pretty things and many thanks for the present to his master when he got home. Next day the cat went again into the wood, and jumped up on a red deer's head, and sat between his horns, and forced him to go to the palace. Then Peter went again into the kitchen, and said he was come with a little present for the king, if he would be pleased to take it. And the king was still more glad to get the red deer than he had been to get the reindeer, and asked again who it was that sent so fine a present. "Why, it's Lord Peter, of course," said the lad. But when the king wanted to know where Lord Peter lived, he got the same answer as the day before, and this day too he gave Peter a good lump of money to drink his health with. The third day the cat came with an elk, and so when Peter got into the palace kitchen and said he had a little present for the king, if he'd be pleased to take it, the king came out at once into the kitchen, and when he saw the grand big elk, he was so glad he scarcely knew which leg to stand on. And this day too he gave Peter many more dollars, at least 100. He wished now once for all to know where this Lord Peter lived, and asked about this thing and that, but the lad said he daren't say, for his master's sake, who had strictly forbidden him to tell. "Well then," said the king, "beg Lord Peter to come and see me." Yes, the lad would take that message. But when Peter got out into the yard and met the cat, he said, "A pretty scrape you've got me into now, for here's the king who wants me to come and see him, and you know I've nothing to go in but these rags I stand and walk in." "Oh, don't be afraid about that," said the cat. "In 3 days you shall have a coach and horses and fine clothes, so fine that the gold falls from them, and then you may go and see the king very well. But mind, whatever you see in the king's palace, you must say that you have far finer and grander things in your own. Don't forget that." No, no, Peter would bear that in mind, never fear. So when 3 days were over, the cat came with a coach and horses and clothes, and all that Peter wanted, and altogether it was as grand as anything you ever set eyes on. So off he set, and the cat ran alongside the coach. The king met him well and graciously, but whatever the king offered him, and whatever he showed him, Peter said 'twas all very well, but he had far finer and better things in his own house. The king seemed not quite to believe this, but Peter stuck to what he said, and at last the king got so angry he couldn't bear it any longer. "Now I'll go home with you," he said, "and see if it be true what you've been telling me, that you have far finer and better things of your own. But if you've been telling a pack of lies, heaven help you, that's all I say." "Now you've got me into a fine scrape," said Peter to the cat, "for here's the king coming home with me, but my home, that's not so easy to find, I think." "Oh, never mind," said the cat, "only do you drive after me as I run before." So off they set, first Peter, who drove after his cat, and then the king and all his court. But when they had driven a good bit, they came to a great flock of fine sheep that had wool so long it almost touched the ground. "If you'll only say," said the cat to the shepherd, "this flock of sheep belongs to Lord Peter, when the king asks you, I'll give you this silver spoon," which she had taken with her from the king's palace. Yes, he was willing enough to do that. So when the king came up, he said to the lad who watched the sheep, "Well, I never saw so large and fine a flock of sheep in my life. Whose is it, my little lad?" "Why," said the lad, "whose should it be but Lord Peter's?" A little while after, they came to a great herd of fine brindled kine, who were all so sleek the sun shone from them. "If you'll only say," said the cat to the neat herd, "this herd is the Lord Peter's, when the king asks you, I'll give you this silver ladle." And the ladle, too, she had taken from the king's palace. "Yes, with all my heart," said the neat herd. So when the king came up, he was quite amazed at the fine fat herd, for such a herd he had never seen before. And so he asked the neat herd who owned those brindled kine. "Why, who should own them but Lord Peter?" said the neat herd. So they went on a little farther, and came to a great drove of horses, the finest you ever saw, 6 of each color, bay and black and brown and chestnut. "If you'll only say this drove of horses is Lord Peter's, when the king asks you," said the cat, "I'll give you this silver stoop." And the stoop too, she had taken from the palace. Yes, the lad was willing enough, so when the king came up he was quite amazed at the grand herd of horses, for the matches of such horses he had never yet set eyes on, he said. So he asked the lad who watched them whose all those blacks and bays and browns and chestnuts were. "Whose should they be," said the lad, "but Lord Peter's?" So when they had gone a good bit farther, they came to a castle. First there was a gate of tin, next there was a gate of silver, and next a gate of gold. The castle itself was of silver, and so dazzling white that it quite hurt one's eyes to look at it in the sunbeams which fell on it just as they reached it. So they went into it, and the cat told Peter to say this was his house. As for the castle inside, it was far finer than it looked outside, for everything was of pure gold, chairs and tables and benches and all. And when the king had gone all over it and seen everything high and low, he got quite shameful and downcast. "Yes," he said at last, "Lord Peter has everything far finer than I have. There's no gainsaying that." And so he wanted to be off home again. But Peter begged him to stay to supper, and the king stayed, but he was sour and surly the whole time. So as they sat at supper, back came the Troll who owned the castle, and gave such a great knock at the door. "Who's this eating my meat and drinking my mead like swine in here?" roared out the Troll. As soon as the cat heard that, she ran down to the gate. "Stop a bit," she said, "and I'll tell you how the farmer sets to work to get in his winter rye." So she told him such a long story about the winter's rye. First of all, you see, he plows his field, and then he dungs it, and then he plows it again, and then he harrows it, and so she went on till the sun rose. "Oh, do look behind you, and there you'll see such a lovely lady," said the cat to the Troll. So the Troll turned round, and of course, as soon as he saw the sun, he burst. "Now all this is yours," said the cat to Lord Peter. "Now you must cut off my head. That's all I ask for what I have done for you." "Nay, nay," said Lord Peter, "I'll never do any such thing. That is flat." "If you don't," said the cat, "see if I don't claw your eyes out." Well, so Lord Peter had to do it, though it was sore against his will. He cut off the cat's head, but there and then she became the loveliest princess you ever set eyes on, and Lord Peter fell in love with her at once. "Yes, all this greatness was mine first," said the Princess, "but a Troll bewitched me to be a cat in your father's and mother's cottage. Now you may do as you please, whether you take me as your queen or not, for you are now king over all this realm." Well, well, there was little doubt Lord Peter would be willing enough to have her as his queen, and so there was a wedding that lasted 8 whole days, and a feast besides, and after it was over I stayed no longer with Lord Peter and his lovely queen, and so I can't say anything more about them. End of section 49.
Of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. read by George Yeager, Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webbe Dasent. Section 50. The Seven Foals. Once on a time there was a poor couple who lived in a wretched hut, far, far away in the wood. How they lived I can't tell, but I'm sure it was from hand to mouth, and hard work even then. But they had 3 sons, and the youngest of them was Boots, of course, for he did little else than lie there and poke about in the ashes. So one day the eldest lad said he would go out to earn his bread, and soon he got leave and wandered out into the world. There he walked and walked the whole day, and when evening drew in he came to a king's palace, and there stood the king out on the steps and asked whither he was bound. "Oh, I'm going about looking after a place," said the lad. "Will you serve me?" asked the king, "and watch my 7 foals? If you can watch them one whole day and tell me at night what they eat and what they drink, you shall have the princess to wife and half my kingdom. But if you can't, I'll cut 3 red stripes out of your back. Do you hear?" Yes, that was an easy task, the lad thought. He'd do that fast enough, never fear. So next morning, as soon as the first peep of dawn came, the king's coachman let out the 7 foals. Away they went, and the lad after them. You may fancy how they tore over hill and dale, through bush and bog. When the lad had run so long a time, he began to get weary, and when he had held on a while longer, he had more than enough of his watching, and just there he came to a cleft in a rock, where an old hag sat and spun with a distaff. As soon as she saw the lad, who was running after the foals till the sweat ran down his brow, this old hag bawled out, come hither, my pretty son, and let me comb your hair." Yes, the lad was willing enough, so he sat down in the cleft of the rock with the old hag, and laid his head on her lap, and she combed his hair all day, whilst he lay there and stretched his lazy bones. So when evening drew on, the lad wanted to go away. "I may just as well toddle straight home now," said he, "for it's no use my going back to the palace." "Stop a bit till it's dark," said the old hag, "and then the king's foals will pass by here again, and then you can run home with them, and then no one will know that you have lain here all day long instead of watching the foals." So when they came, she gave the lad a flask of water and a clod of turf. Those he was to show to the king, and say that was what his 7 foals ate and drank. "Have you watched true and well the whole day now?" asked the king, when the lad came before him in the evening. "Yes, I should think so," said the lad. "Then you can tell me what my 7 foals eat and drink," said the king. Yes, and so the lad pulled out the flask of water and the clod of turf which the old hag had given him. "Here you see their meat, and here you see their drink," said the lad. But then the king saw plain enough how he had watched, and he got so wroth he ordered his men to chase him away home on the spot. But first they were to cut 3 red stripes out of his back and rub salt into them. So when the lad got home again, you may fancy what a temper he was in. He'd gone out once to get a place, he said, but he'd never do so again. Next day the second son said he would go out into the world and try his luck. His father and mother said no, and bade him look at his brother's back. But the lad wouldn't give in. He held to his own, and at last he got leave to go, and set off. So when he had walked the whole day, he too came to the king's palace. There stood the king out on the steps, and asked whither he was bound. And when the lad said he was looking about for a place, the king said he might have a place there, and watch his 7 foals. But the king laid down the same punishment and the same reward as he had settled for his brother. Well, the lad was willing enough. He took the place at once with the king, for he thought he'd soon watch the foals and tell the king what they ate and drank. So In the grey of the morning the coachman let out the 7 foals, and off they went again over hill and dale, and the lad after them. But the same thing happened to him as had befallen his brother. When he had run after the foals a long, long time, till he was both warm and weary, he passed by the cleft in a rock, where an old hag sat and spun with a distaff, and she bawled out to the lad, come hither, my pretty son, and let me comb your hair." That the lad thought a good offer, so he let the foals run on their way, and sat down in the cleft with the old hag. There he sat, and there he lay, taking his ease, and stretching his lazy bones the whole day. When the foals came back at nightfall, he too got a flask of water and a clod of turf from the old hag to show to the king. But when the king asked the lad, "Can you tell me now what my 7 foals eat and drink?" and the lad pulled out the flask and the clod, and said, "Here you see their meat, and here you see their drink," then the king got wroth again, and ordered them to cut 3 red stripes out of the lad's back, and rub salt in, and chase him home that very minute. And so, when the lad got home, he also told how he had fared, and said he had gone out once to get a place, but he'd never do so any more. The 3rd day, Boots wanted to set out. He had a great mind to try and watch the 7 foals, he said. The others laughed at him and made a game of him, saying, "When we've fared so ill, you'll do it better. A fine joke. You look like it, you who have never done anything but lie there and poke about in the ashes." "Yes," said Boots, "I don't see why I shouldn't go, for I've got it into my head, and I can't get it out again." And so, in spite of all the jeers of the others and the prayers of the old people, there was no help for it, and Boots set out. So after he had walked the whole day, he too came at dusk to the king's palace. There stood the king out on the steps, and asked whither he was bound. "Oh," said Boots, "I'm going about seeing if I can hear of a place." "Whence do you come, then?" said the king, for he wanted to know a little more about them before he took any one into his service. So Boots said whence he came, and how he was brother to those 2 who had watched the king's 7 foals, and ended by asking if he might try to watch them next day. "Oh, stuff!" said the king, for he got quite cross if he even thought of them. "If you're brother to those 2, you're not worth much, I'll be bound. I've had enough of such scamps." "Well," said Boots, "but since I've come so far, I may just as well get leave to try, I too." "Oh, very well, with all my heart," said the king. "If you will have your back flayed, you're quite welcome." "I'd much rather have the princess," said Boots. So next morning, at grey of dawn, the coachman let out the 7 foals again, and away they went over hill and dale, through bush and bog, and Boots behind them. And so, when he too had run a long while, he came to the cleft in the rock, where the old hag sat, spinning at her distaff. So she bawled out to Boots, come hither, my pretty son, and let me comb your hair." "Don't you wish you may catch me?" said Boots. "Don't you wish you may catch me?" as he ran along, leaping and jumping, and holding on by one of the foal's tails. And when he had got well past the cleft in the rock, the youngest foal said, "Jump up on my back, my lad, for we've a long way before us still." So Boots jumped up on his back. So they went on and on, a long, long way. "Do you see anything now?" said the foal. "No," said Boots. So they went on a good bit farther. "Do you see anything now?" asked the foal. "Oh, no," said the lad. So when they had gone a great, great way farther, I'm sure I can't tell how far, the foal asked again, "Do you see anything now?" "Yes," said Boots, "now I see something that looks white, just like a tall, big birch trunk." "Yes," said the foal, "we're going into that trunk." So when they got to the trunk, the eldest foal took and pushed it on one side, and then they saw a door where it had stood, and inside the door was a little room, and in the room there was scarce anything but a little fireplace and one or two benches, but behind the door hung a great rusty sword and a little pitcher. "Can you brandish the sword?" said the foals. "Try." So Boots tried, but he couldn't. Then they made him take a pull at the pitcher, first once, then twice, and then thrice, and then he could wield it like anything. "Yes," said the foals, "now you may take the sword with you, and with it you must cut off all our 7 heads on your wedding day, and then we'll be princes again as we were before. For we are brothers of that princess whom you are to have when you can tell the king what we eat and drink. But an ugly troll has thrown this shape over us. Now mind, when you have hewn off our heads, to take care to lay each head at the tail of the trunk which it belonged to before, and then the spell will have no more power over us." Yes, Boots promised all that, and then on they went, and when they had travelled a long, long way, the foal asked, "Do you see anything?" "No," said Boots. So they travelled a good bit still. "And now?" said the foal. "No, I see nothing," said Boots. So they travelled many, many miles again, over hill and dale. "Now then," said the foal, "do you see anything now?" "Yes," said Boots, "now I see something like a blue stripe, far, far away." "Yes," said the foal, "that's a river we've got to cross." Over the river was a long, grand bridge, and when they had got over to the other side, they travelled on a long, long way. At last the foal asked again if Boots didn't see anything. Yes, this time he saw something that looked black, far, far away, just as though it were a church steeple. "Yes," said the foal, "that's where we are going to turn in." So when the foals got into the churchyard, they became men again, and looked like princes, with such fine clothes that it glistened from them. And so they went into the church, and took the bread and wine from the priest who stood at the altar. And Boots, he went in too, but when the priest had laid his hands on the princes, and given them the blessing, they went out of the church again, and Boots went out too, but he took with him a flask of wine and a wafer. And as soon as ever the 7 princes came out into the churchyard, they were turned into foals again, and so Boots got up on the back of the youngest, and so they all went back the same way they had come, only they went much, much faster. First they crossed the bridge, next they passed the trunk, and then they passed the old hag who sat at the cleft and span, and they went by her so fast that Boots couldn't hear what the old hag screeched after him, but he heard so much as to know she was in an awful rage. It was almost dark when they got back to the palace, and the king himself stood out on the steps and waited for them. "Have you watched well and true the whole day?" said he to Boots. "I've done my best," answered Boots. "Then you can tell me what my 7 foals eat and drink," said the king. Then Boots pulled out the flask of wine and the wafer, and showed them to the king. "Here you see their meat, and here you see their drink," said he. "Yes," said the king, "you have watched true and well, and you shall have the princess and half the kingdom." So they made ready the wedding feast, and the king said it should be such a grand one, it should be the talk far and near. But when they sat down to the bridal feast, the bridegroom got up and went down to the stable, for he said he had forgotten something and must go fetch it. And when he got down there, he did as the foals had said, and hewed their heads off, all 7, the eldest first, and the others after him, and at the same time he took care to lay each head at the tail of the foal to which it belonged, and as he did this, lo, they all became princes again. So when he went into the bridal hall with the 7 princes, the king was so glad he kissed Boots and patted him on the back, and his bride was still more glad of him than she had been before. "Half the kingdom you have got already," said the king, "and the other half you shall have after my death. For my sons can easily get themselves lands and wealth, now they are princes again." And so, like enough, there was mirth and fun at that wedding. I was there too, but there was no one to care for poor me, and so I got nothing but a bit of bread and butter, and I laid it down on the stove, and the bread was burnt, and the butter ran, and so I didn't get even the smallest crumb. Wasn't that a great shame? End of section 50.